and welcome back to Darvanalee Designs Studio. For those that don't know, my name's Nicole Reid and today we are here for DDs Row by Row Quilt-a-Long. We are up to a row 2, a block 2. This is the block that we're making today. It's called Flying Squares and it's got a little bit of a tricky way to put it together. So let's get started. Thank you everybody for joining me last time for our first row for the DDs Row by Row Quilt-a-Long. I've noticed that some of you have been posting up in the groups, which has been great, and over on Instagram. So welcome along to the Quilt-a-Long. Now, this video is not going to be as long as last time's. Last time we went through a lot of tips and tricks and everything like that. So if you're looking for something along the lines of seam allowance, leader cloth, cutting or anything like that, just refer to video 1, and that is row 1 block 1, the Ohio Star. So they're in this playlist, so you'll be able to find them quite easily. If you save the playlist, all of them will just appear in this playlist each time. Alright, so you're going to need 3 fabrics today. You're going to need your background fabric, you're going to need 2 contrasting fabrics, one playing as a medium and one playing as a dark. So my red is playing as a dark, my green is playing as a medium, and then I've got my neutral, which is my background, and I've got a tone on tone for that one. You're going to need a couple of rulers, you're going to need your rotary cutter, some scissors or thread snips to trim off your threads. You're also going to need some pins. You're going to need a friction pen today because this one is a little bit tricky how it goes together, but I know that you'll be able to do it. The way I show you is super quick, super simple, and you'll be able to get it together without too much of a problem. As I said, you're going to need some rulers, and you're also going to need your 1/4 inch foot. So you can see here I've got 2 different types. One has a guide on it. That's the one that I'm using, and then this one here doesn't have a guide on it, so the edge of your fabric goes up against that little toe there. Alright, you might need a quick unpick as well. It's always handy to have one of those. Alright, the most important thing that you're going to need though is your download. So if you head over to our website, the link is down below for your download. You can see here I've got mine. Hopefully there's not too much of a reflection there. So head over and grab that. It is called Flying Squares. You will see the thumbnail from the video on our freebies page for that block. Once the row by row is done, I will condense that all into one file to make it super easy to find. But as we're going, we're just doing them one by one. All right, so head over, grab that, come back, and you're going to cut out some fabrics, and then we are going to get started. Okay, so the first thing that you need to do is cut your fabrics. All right, so from your background fabric, you're going to need 4 pieces for each block. Okay, and these pieces here that I'm just pulling off my design board are 2.5 inches by 6.5 inches. You're also going to need in your background fabric a 2.5 inch square. From your red fabric, you're going to need 4 of your at 2.5 inches, so you need 4 of those, and then you're also going to need 4 of your green fabric or whatever fabric you're using. Okay, so you've seen how I just pulled them off there. I've laid these out, and I'm especially paying attention to how my fabric is going with this one, because I don't want it going all different ways, especially with this red one. Okay, and you can see there that it just easily gets laid in on your design board. If you haven't got one of these design boards, check out the card up the top here and you'll be able to make one for yourself. They're super easy to make. No hot glue gun or anything like that, all done on the sewing machine. Alright, so we have our blocks laid out, and as you can see, I'm just double checking my fabric because it is very easy to put a tone on tone upside down in the wrong way. Alright, so this is what our block is going to look like. Now we have this little square in the center. We're just going to leave him alone for a little while, and we're just going to move our green and red fabrics and our white fabrics just away from that for a moment, just so we can have a little bit of a chat on how this is going to go together. Now, we don't have to worry about this centerpiece just for now. So what we're going to be focusing on is our white fabric and our red and green red and green fabric, a little bit colorblind there today. All right, so basically what we're going to do is we are going to do some chain piecing again. Now I explained what chain piecing was in the first video. If you haven't done that before, just flick back and have a look and you'll be able to find that. All right, and we're just going to get our pins and we're just going to pin them together. Now, my tip in the last video was I always pin on the side that needs to be sewn. Okay, so I'm just using my flat pins here because there's no seams or anything yet, so that makes it nice and easy. And I probably did forget to mention at the beginning of the video, we also need an iron and an ironing pad. So make sure that you've got one of those or your ironing board. Okay, so we can see there that we're going to sew those together. So basically, this is going to go together really, really quick. We're going to head over to the sewing machine and we're going to chain piece these through. Then we're going to come back and we're going to press them. And then we'll add our white bits onto it and then we'll start the assembly of the block. That's how quick it is. It's super quick, this one. You'll get this done. Once you've done your cutting, you'll get this done in one afternoon quite easily. All right, so let's head over to the sewing machine and quickly chain piece these through, and then we'll come back and we'll press these open. All right, so we are here at the sewing machine, and as you can see, I've got my leaders cloth underneath that. I'm just double checking that I have got my machine in the right position, and all the rest of it I have fixed all that because I was sewing and zigzagging yesterday, and I can tell you it scares the heck out of you when you start sewing and you haven't taken it off zigzag. All right, so last time we were here I explained how to do chain piecing, and it is exactly how it sounds. We are just going to chain these through. We have our leader cloth on there as well. That will just help with not sucking down any fabric. And as you're going, you want to remove your pins. Okay, so here we are back at the design pad. We've just got to grab our, move my iPad out of the way before I knock that over. We've just got to grab our ironing pad and our iron, and we're just going to give these a quick press. Now, we also talked about setting the seams last time as well. So to do that, all we do is we just pop our pieces down and then we just give them a press and we set the seam. Now again, we're going to go to the dark side. So my red fabric is playing as my dark fabric. So I'm just going to roll that over without stretching it. And I'm just going to press that in place. Set that aside. Now all our fabrics were prepped and everything prior to this. Okay, so anytime we do a block, we are going to be prepping our fabrics, and I go through that in the first couple of minutes of the video from last fortnight, sorry. Now just make sure that you have actually rolled it all over. You would have seen just then that my block wasn't completely rolled over, so it looked a little bit crooked, but I have now fixed that. All right, set your iron aside. All right, so you can see now that our pieces are matching up with our white pieces. So what we're going to do is we're going to just flip them over, and again, we're going to pop a couple of pins in there. We don't have to worry about meeting up any seams or anything. We just want to align our raw edges with this one, and we'll pop a couple of pins in there. And again, we're just going to do our 1/4 inch seam allowance and chain piece that through. Now just remember to pin on the side that you're going to sew, and then that way it won't get confusing when you pull it off and start sewing it, because you'll be surprised how many times you'll actually spin something, not meaning to. You think you haven't done it, but then you get back to the design board and you've spun your fabric. Alright, so we are on our last one, making sure all our raw edges are aligned. Alright, so now we'll head back over to the sewing machine and we'll stitch these together. Alright, so we pop our leader cloth underneath there, put our needle in the down position, stitch that through to the beginning, and then grab our first piece, and we are just going to stitch that into place. Okay, so now we need need to just clip these apart and press them. So after you've done that, grab your iron. All right, again, we're just going to set our seam. Okay. I just lay them on top of one another, makes it super quick. All right. So then all I'm going to do is I'm just going to open that up to the white, okay, and press that in place. So you can see that I'm not stretching anything, I'm just rolling it over. Okay, now pop that out of the way, bring our design board back. And again, we're just going to place these where they need to go. Now, I'm being very mindful of my my placement of my red fabric because I don't want it going all different ways. All right, so this is where it gets a little bit tricky. Okay, now if you've never done a seam like this before, I'm just going to show you how I do it. I am no expert by any means, and sometimes I have a few fails before I get a success. So grab your quick unpick just in case you need it. Okay, we are going to do sort of like a Y seam, but it's not a Y seam, if that makes any sense at all. All right, so basically I'm going to show you how to stitch this together. So you can see here we've got our 4 components that we've just sewn, and then we've got this bit here. So you might be wondering, how's this going to go on? So basically all we're going to do is we're going to take our white fabric, our white square, and on our bottom piece we're going to place them right sides together. Now if you feel under here, you can actually feel your seam, and if you just grab your little friction pen, okay, and you want to come in and just feel that seam. I just want to make a mark just where that seam is. Okay, now this is on the back side of my quilt, so it's not going to make any difference. Okay, and hopefully you can see that I've just put a little mark there. I haven't measured anything, I've just put a mark there. That's where we're going to stop stitching. Okay, we're going to sew from this flat edge here, okay, and we're going to stitch 1/4 inch and we're going to stop there. Now, you don't need to do a back stitch if you don't want to, but if you feel a little bit uneasy about it might come apart or anything, just do 1 or 2 back stitches and that'll be fine. All right, so we're going to start at this end and we're going to stitch along until we come to here. All right, so I'm just going to duck off to the sewing machine and do that, and then we will be back. Okay, so I've placed a pin in here, and this is just to hold it in place, and I'm going to grab my leader cloth. Okay, and get my sewing machine all set up and ready to go. All right, now as I'm coming up to this, I'm going to actually just sew it like a normal seam on a straight edge. But as I said, I'm going to stop at this little mark just here. Okay, so just remember to stop there. It is very important. If you go a little bit further, it doesn't matter. We can always unpick a stitch or two. That's why I said it's not important to back stitch. All right, so just remove your pins as you go. And then as you're coming up to that, just slow down a bit and do a stitch, back stitch if you want to. As I said, it's not important because we'll come back around to this. Okay, so you can see here I've just stitched 1/4 inch down to there, and I'm just going to flip that open, and I'm not going to press it as such at this point. I am just going to finger press that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this piece and I'm going to lay that on top. And I'm going to line up all of my raw edges, but this time I'm going to use my fork pins because I actually have a seam that I need to sort out. All right, so we've got this seam here that we've got to worry about, so we're going to just nest those seams up together. Okay, now just like I did in the last video, I just line everything up and I bring my seams together, and then I put my fork pin on either side of that seam. So I come in about 1/4 inch from the raw edge with my 2 prongs, and I go on either side of my stitch, and then I just make sure that that is all lining up. And now I know that that's not going to go anywhere because I've got a pin on either side of my seam, and they're nested really nicely. I can look at this and I can see that they're touching and they're nested really nicely. And now I can play around with the rest and making sure that everything is lining up properly. All my raw edges are lining up. Okay, now don't worry about what's happening down here. Okay, we're just focusing on here where we've got to sew. Okay, that will all fix itself in a little bit. Okay, always looks a little bit messy. Okay, use my flat pins. I like them better. They're a little bit longer. They hold everything a little bit better. All right. Okay. All right, so we'll head over to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch that down. All right, now I've just popped that under and I'm just going to take that first pin out and then I'm going to start sewing a 1/4 inch. And then as I come up to my fork pin, sometimes I grab my tailor's awl, okay, and I'll just hold that in place. All right, without stretching or anything like that. I'll put my tailor's awl between those and I know that that's going to hold that seam. Sometimes you might feel it move, other times you won't. Now I didn't feel it move at that time. If you feel it move, just stop, take it out of the machine and realign it. Right, so we've got that all sorted out. We're going to roll that back and check our seam. So you can see here our two little seams have nested together. As I said, it didn't move. If you feel it move, and you can feel it through your tailor's awl, if you feel it move, just stop. Take it out of the machine and fix it. That way you don't have to unpick a great deal of stuff. All right, so again, I'm not going to worry too much about pressing this at this point. I'm just going to basically just finger press that and lay it smooth so you can see there. All right, so the next one that's going to go on is this one here, okay, and then we're just going to bring that across, and again, we're going to nest our seams, we're going to use our fork pins, okay. I probably should put all these pins away. I'm terrible when I'm patchworking, I just leave everything out. I end up in a right mess. All right, so, okay, so we're just going to nest our seams, grab a fork pin, and again, come in about 1/4 inch with the prongs on either side of your stitching and just place that in. Okay, now I know that that is not going to, as I said, not going to move anywhere. Okay, and then just do what we did previously. Line up our raw edges. Again, don't worry about what's happening down here. All right, and head over to the sewing machine and stitch a 1/4 inch. Okay, so we've got that piece on. I'll just put my pins back. All right, so you can see there that that's lined up really good. Okay, I'm happy with that. I'm not going to be stressed about that at all, even though it's tiny little bit, but it's not even worth worrying about. All right, so we're up to our last piece. Now, this is where it's going to get a little bit tricky. Now we're going to sew this piece on just like we have the other ones, except when we get down to here, we're going to have to do a little bit of playing around. All right, so basically what you're going to do is you're going to nest your seams like we did with the other ones and make sure that all your raw edges are aligning. Okay, and to make it easier, I'm just going to turn the block. Okay, find where our little squares are. As you get more experience with doing seams and using these fork pins, you will actually feel when the seams move. It took me quite a little while to get used to the sensation of things moving. Okay, and just pop in a pin. Okay, so what's going to happen down here is you're going to just move this section away. So you can see there, it'll just fold out of the way. Okay, and that's why we left a little bit more than a 1/4 inch. All right, and what I like to do here is I just finger press it. Okay, and I'll just grab a pin and I'll just hold that in place there so I know that it's not going to give me any grief. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to pop a pin in here so all our seam allowance, all our raw edges are aligning. And we're going to head over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew a 1/4 inch like normal. Okay, now what I normally do here is I go off the edge. You don't need to stop beforehand because we've done that over here. So just sew your, as if you've just sewn it on like the other ones, you're just going to do your 1/4 inch all the way along. Now you don't need to backstitch at the beginning, but what I'm going to ask you to do at this end, I just want you to do a little backstitch, okay, and that's just going to help with it nesting the seams and everything, okay. You can do it without the backstitch, but it makes your life a little bit easier and a little bit better to match up our final square for when we sew the next bit on. Okay, so head to the sewing machine, 1/4 inch seam allowance, and don't forget to do a little backstitch at the end. We're going to start sewing, take our pin out. Grab our tailor's awl, handy little tool that it is. Just hold those seams in place, pull that fork pin out, and let it feed through. Okay, now just make sure that that piece that was here that you folded back, so you can see this here, just make sure that you're not going to stitch on that. Now your little white piece of fabric will want to curl under, as you can see there, it's just starting to curl under. See there, it's curling under. You want that to be flat. Now don't worry if it's sticking out a little bit or anything like that, it's going to get caught up in the seam allowance. You want your raw edges aligning. Okay, you can remove that pin now, and we're just going to stitch off the end, okay, making sure that we're not stitching this bit here, okay, so just make sure that is completely out of the way, and then we're just going to do a little back stitch. Okay, and what that's going to do is that's just going to secure it in place because we've got to fiddle around with it a little bit now. Alright, so now you can take that out of the machine. You can unpin this piece here now as well, so that'll be sort of just hanging there because it's not sewn together with anything. Okay, so you can see it's just like this. So what we're going to do is we are going to line up all our squares and everything like that. So you can see here we've got a little bit that's been stitched there, so that is sort of, see how it's sort of coming undone a little bit. I'm just going to move that fabric out of the way, and I'm just going to give it a little bit of a stitch so you can see there a little bit clearer. See how it's just that last stitch hasn't quite got to the end, so I'm just going to stitch that. I don't necessarily need my leader's cloth under because I'm actually starting up the fabric a bit, but I will do a back stitch because I'm starting a new thread. Okay, and I'm just going to go off, and because it seems to be coming apart, I'll do a little bit of a back stitch. So that sometimes can happen. If that happens, just stitch it. Okay, so you can see now that's all together. Alright, now I'm going to head over to the design board and I'm going to show you how to put the last piece together. Alright, so we have all our bits and pieces on here, but we still have one seam that hasn't been sewn together yet. So this is our block, how it was laid out on our design board. This is where we started by sewing this square on, and now we've got this bit here. So now all we need to do is just do exactly what we've done with every other one, and that is match up our seams, put a fork pin in that, and then we're going to start at this end and we're going to stitch up to where we stopped. So basically all we're going to do is flip that over. Okay, and you can see here that our seams are just wanting to nest quite nicely. Okay, it's like a little bit of fabric origami, you might say. So yeah, so you can see here it is all lining up. We'll grab our fork pin, and again, same as every other one, come in a 1/4 inch, pin that into place, and then align up our raw edges. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to head over to the sewing machine so you can see our little pink mark there. This is where our seam is. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to start just here. So about a 1/4 inch away from our pink mark where we stopped. We'll do a little bit of a back stitch because it's a new stitching line into an existing stitch line. And we're going to stitch a 1/4 inch all the way along. Okay, so I'm not going to need my leader's cloth for this one because we are starting on the block. Okay, now we're starting about a 1/4 inch away from the pink mark. And put my needle in the down position. I'm going to do a quick back stitch. I have an automatic back stitch, so that's why I can do that. I'm going to grab my tailor's awl because we're going to get to that nested seams pretty quick, and I'm going to hold that into place, and I'm going to keep slipping. I'm going to hold that into place. I'll take my pins out, and I'm just going to keep sewing all the way. Now, I have a feeling that that actually moved, so I'm just going to check that quickly. I may have to unpick. No, it didn't move. All right, so I'm going to head over to the design board, and we're going to grab our iron and our ironing pad and give it a really good press, but that's it. Our block is now together. All right. So there we go. Our block is all together. You can see that there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to give that a really good press, and then you're going to repeat that 6 times, and then we'll put our row together. So you would have noticed throughout that block, I just sort of finger pressed all the seams and everything like that. That is fine to do. Sometimes it's, especially when you've got a lot of components, sometimes it is actually a little bit easier to do that, and I often do that with my patchworking. There's lots of little tools that you can get as well. I don't have any of mine handy because I haven't done patchwork for some time, so they're all packed away still from the renovations. All right, so you can see there that my block is now done, and now I'm going to head off. I'm going to sew the other 5, so I've got 6, and when we come back, we'll be putting our row together. Okay, so we've got all of our 6 blocks. I've already started putting some of the row together, but I'm going to show you how it all goes into the row. So you can see here I've got all, not that they fit on camera, but I have all of my blocks ready to go and sewn together. So that is how they lay out. Okay, just side by side, same as the last one, and then we're just going to put our last block on. All right, so now that we've got all our blocks together, we do have to trim up. I've already, as you've seen, I've already sewn some together, so I'm just going to trim this one up. You can see here I've got a little bit of a kick out and all the rest of it. So I'm just going to grab my rotary cutter and my square ruler, and they should be around about 10.5 inches. This is pretty close. So all I'm going to do is just make sure that it's all measuring up okay. And it is. Just need to take that little bit off here. Just a little bit, just kicked out a little bit. And that sometimes happens. You get just like a little bit of a wobbly edge. This is actually just a tad bit bigger than 10.5, but I've got room to wiggle around with it. So, but I'm going to leave it at that, because that's about the size of the other ones. But I've got a couple of straight edges now, which is really good. And then I've got all of my other blocks here, and I'm just going to lay this on top, and I'm just going to line it up with the edge of the other block, and then I will basically just pin it into place, and then we're just going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and that's it. Our row is done. As I said, the subsequent videos from the first one will be a lot shorter because we don't need to go through all the tips and tricks. You've got that video to refer back to, which is really good. Makes life a little bit easier for yourself. You can take notes. You can watch it as many times as you want. And I also, it is also in a playlist, so you can save the playlist, and that way you can just come back to your account and you can click on it, and it'll all be there for you, and they'll all be in order from beginning to end. All right, so as I said, we are just going to stitch a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then our row is finished. All right, so we've sewn that on, and now what we need to do, if it stops escaping from me, is press that all into place, and then we can set that aside ready for our next row. All right, so there you go. That's how it all goes together. So you can see we just put them side by side. We don't have to worry about any seams having to match up or anything like that. Nice, quick, simple block. We've got a nice little technique in there of how to put the block together when we've got a bit that isn't sewn when we get around to the edge of it. So hopefully you really enjoyed that today and you have enjoyed making this block. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I do hope that you enjoyed making the flying squares block. That little bit at the end can be a little bit tricky, but I'm sure by the end of this you will have it down pat. Just make sure that you do your back stitching where I've told you to, and if you need to watch it a couple of times you can just play it back, so that makes it nice and easy. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and then that way you won't miss out on the other rows. Also, if you like this video today, give it a thumbs up down below. And don't forget, we've got our tip jar link down below. You can leave me a tip if you enjoyed this video today. Have a great week, everybody, and I'll see you all again next week for a regular sewing tutorial. And then I'll see you in 2 weeks for Block 3, Row 3 of DDs Row by Row Quilt-a-Long. Bye for now.